Well, it's our appointed time of 6:30. Let me welcome all of you to our second community meeting and conversation, and thank you for coming tonight about our efforts to implement a wayfinding signage program here in Danville. We have back with us John Carmen and his associate. Tonight we are anticipating spending about an hour, maybe up to an hour and a half or so, going over some material involving you and asking your opinions about certain matters. And so it'll be kind of a two-part meeting. I guess first some sort of discussion and then a little break in the second part, but we hope to get out of here at about an hour and a half. So with that introduction, John, it's all yours.
Great, thanks.
Oh, one final point. Because we do record this and show this, and it's very hard to hear you, I'm going to be sitting here and we'll circulate the microphone when we get to that point where there's conversation with you, okay? Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ron. Everybody hear me okay? Good. I'm going to twist around here a little bit. So we'll try and move through this. It's been a couple months and maybe a little bit longer than what we had hoped or anticipated, but the end of the summer and the holiday got in our way, and here we are. But I think we have some really good results that we can show everybody, and hopefully we'll get some good feedback. We're going to have a little bit of interaction with you here in a few minutes and get your all's get some ideas from you, or get you all to weigh in on some of our thoughts. What I wanted to do tonight is go through a few things, and just because there's that many items, hopefully it doesn't represent that we're going to be here a long time. What I want to start out with is kind of giving you an overview of what we accomplished at the last meeting. I know everybody, filled out some list about destinations, and you did some post-it note voting, and we're going to kind of give you we'll show you the results of that, and then we're going to let you interact with some other ideas and see where we come out on that. So at the last meeting, we kind of had a Wayfinding 101, and we talked about what wayfinding is. But I'm not going to go back through that by any means, but I wanted to just kind of bring it back home as far as a reference, because understanding what the definition of wayfinding is and what it is that we're trying to accomplish, I think, is important as we begin continuing to move through this process and understanding why we've made some of the decisions that we have, or recommendations. Decisions maybe wasn't the right word, because we're still making those, but we are making some recommendations tonight. But wayfinding is really a way of communicating both internally and externally. And it's about travelers. And don't close your mind to the word travelers, because that can be all forms of traveling, whether it be bike ped or vehicular. And vehicular can be, and I think it's really important we think about vehicles as being the type of traffic, whether it's people in town or visitors in cars, but then we have the commercial kind of traffic, and we'll talk a little bit about that also, because I think at some point we need to segregate commercial from your typical routine vehicular traffic. But it's about communicating to travelers where to go and where their destinations are, and this is kind of the formal definition that we've come up with. But it's about conveying a message and how to move people around within a community, and helping to identify where you are, not only specifically, but it's about placemaking and being able to give an impression about the city. So the sign or wayfinding component itself is important, but just the impression as you travel through and where you're directing people and what parts of town begins to give this kind of holistic impression. We also like to consider scale, and that really relates to the type of traffic also, whether you're a pedestrian or a cyclist or in a commercial truck. And it's all about a system. It's not about just one sign. It's really a very holistic approach and a very systematic approach. So our goals were, for this specific project, are to establish the criteria based on what you all gave us at the last meeting, what our boots on the ground understanding and observations. And we're going to create a family of signs. And we'll actually show you here in a few minutes our initial run at a family. It's not the complete family, but It's still growing, but we're going to give you some ideas on that. Also tonight we'll show you, in the kind of the second part of this, we'll show you our initial thoughts on key locations where these different signs would be located, what we call decision points. So we want to review that with you. And I mentioned this last bullet point before, we want to make sure that we enhance the sense of place. We want this wayfinding system to be somewhat unique and also be something that people will understand it and relate to the city. So as we began making our recommendations about where signs would be located, we created a set of rules or assumptions that we have, and I think, and so I wanted to go through these because if you agree that these assumptions are good, and we think they are, but we're certainly open to any comments. If you agree with these assumptions, then you'll begin to understand the locations of our signs in many instances. One of the really important things to remember, and there will, our subsequent meetings will be getting into this deeper in the weeds on this, is that each sign, we can only identify 3 destinations on each sign. And that's primarily because it is a federal guideline. We're just about all streets, the primary routes within Danville are state highways, and we have to comply with the federal guidelines of 3 signs. Now, there may be some cases where we might be able to get a waiver of maybe 4 locations, but we'll get into that later. If we're just really stumped and think there's a really great reason to have a 4th destination on a sign, we can talk about that and request waivers. But right now, 3 locations. So if there's an intersection and there's maybe, go straight or turn left or right, and there's 6 of those places, then we need to think about what's the most critical. So and those can be kind of difficult decisions, so that's important. Community and institutional destinations will take priority when further out in the community. And we're calling kind of the outlying areas, outlying from downtown, we're calling those the Tier 1 locations. So community or institutional destinations will take priority, but then as we come in towards the center of town, then the priorities begin to change, and we begin to allow people to focus in on specific locations or destinations. Yes, ma'am? Downtown, Center College, the hospital, maybe KSD, but larger, and then as we get closer into town, then maybe we say City Hall or the Dollhouse Museum or Jacobs Hall or Admiral Stadium, or as we get in closer to the court. Does that make sense? Or
you're talking about the bypass when you're talking about the outside for Tier 1.
Yeah.
You're talking about
And I'll be able to show you. I've got a map here in just a little bit. We'll be able to show you, and that's actually part of the second part of this. I'll be able to show you how we've broken the tiers down, and then even after that, we'll show you specific locations. So.
This is kind of like what you talked about last time with putting those more
Right.
generic things on the bypass.
We did talk about that, right?
Before you get closer in.
Right.
And there were 20-some people here who talked about wanting that not to happen,
right.
and wanting you to address it.
Well, and I'm not saying, and you'll see, we're not necessarily scattering signs all around the bypass, but we're going to be looking at critical locations, and we'll get into that, those recommendations.
The response to the last time, what you
Right,
were saying.
right.
Okay.
Okay. Right now, I'm trying to kind of set the rules, if you will, or at least the assumptions. so that hopefully we're all on the same page. If a traveler is past the best route, an alternate direction will not be provided after that route. And let me just maybe use an example. If you're coming from Lexington on Lexington Avenue and you are going to City Hall, there will probably be a sign to turn left on 4th Street to City Hall. But if you don't turn left and you keep going further, there probably won't be a sign with the City Hall destination on it. Okay? That's just kind of an assumption, part of the rules. If a destination is straight ahead, we may not continue to repeat that at every sign location. Let me give an example, and I'll use let's just say at, I'll keep using Lexington Avenue. At Lexington Avenue, at Stanford Road or Wilderness Road, where you turn there at the fort. Let's just say we have, and I'm not committing to this or saying that we will, let's just say that at that sign location, we say the Dollhouse Museum straight ahead, or kind of bear to the right. And then we keep going on Lexington Avenue, and at 4th Street, or let's just say 3rd Street going to KSD, we may say KSD to the left, but we may not say the Dollhouse straight, okay? And again, it's going back to, if I had the opportunity to list 6 different things, maybe I would do some repeating, but making some critical choices. We're focusing on the major corridors. We're not necessarily going to have signs, say, on Martin Luther King or Walnut, but focusing on the major corridors. And we're focusing a majority of the signage on inbound traffic as they come towards downtown. Now, there will probably be some instances, and I'm going to use Lexington Avenue again. As you're going out of town, say on Lexington Avenue and Maple Avenue, perhaps we will have signage, to Center College or to Fort Herod or something like that. That's just, so it's not necessarily focusing people back in towards town, because there may be some some of the Tier 1 destinations that we're looking at. I'm just going to pause for a minute. Is that kind of halfway clear, hopefully? Okay, good. So last time, you'll remember, we did the Post-it note voting, and these are the images that you all voted upon, and we took that back, and don't know if you all remember this, but these are the kind of the choices or the styles or the characters that we offered. So probably not surprising, this was the choice that most people, there was a scattering of choices on the others, but this kind of style or this kind of character was what everybody was gravitating towards, just to let you know what the voting results were. So then we had everybody wrote down different destinations, and we don't have the exact tally, and I'm not sure that really matters, but we've kind of broken it down into 3 different tiers or categories with a listing of those that were chosen the most, and then we kind of had this middle tier, kind of we're saying moderately chosen. You can begin looking at this list. And those that maybe just had 1 or 2 or 3 votes of, there were some that maybe just one individual listed something, but I'm not sure that we listed that. I forget one of the choices. But these were the prevailing destinations that were listed. I don't know if you all think of anything else or agree with this, but I mean, this is what you all told us at the last meeting. So our next step was to began thinking about a number of things. Number one, what are the major routes? What are the most highly traveled routes? But more interestingly is, just as designers, we wanted to begin thinking about what the wayfinding components look like. And so we took we took this clue up here and began developing some ideas about signage. But we also had we try and look at the environment or the community to get some inspirations about signage. And while there's a lot of different architecture or landscape components around the community, these are representative of, these 6 images are representative to us that of some components that really kind of prevailed. And you start to see a theme in this. And the theme is, the theme is windows. If you begin looking at these, you can begin to see that there's different styles of windows and the treatments, the arches over the top of them, the keystones. In addition to that are some of the architectural components, and they may not show up real well, but looking at the eaves, the what I call the dental work up in the eaves. So again, these were clues. Matt has spent a ton of time on the ground taking pictures. I know Danville, but these images kind of popped out as these are pretty good clues of what might be representative. And not surprisingly, these kind of match up with kind of traditional, classic kinds of imagery. So that began to give us some ideas about some options for signage. So these are fairly prototypical, and we're going to go through several slides here, and you can begin to see a trend in these. So what I'd like for you to look at are the geometries of the sign and the signpost. Begin looking at for the most part, the top part where we're showing the Danville logo and kind of the new branded image. I think I mentioned post, but also you'll see in some of these we have some color variations. Okay. On the one on the right, you will see the color bars along the bottom. And that is, we'll show you here in a few minutes how those colors will begin to relate to different kinds of land uses like recreation or historical or institutional or healthcare. And we'll show you some ideas on that here in a few minutes. So this is one set of options. This is another set of options. If I mentioned that we've got some color variations, I apologize, but you'll start to see some color variations in the signs, but also the destination bars on these have some different colors, and that just is to show you how we might use colors to identify that it is, healthcare or recreational or educational. So you begin seeing some different styles. You see different geometries. You see the keystone at the top. On the top far right, we gave an example of not even using the entire logo or brand, but just using the D. Simpler, but perhaps that doesn't carry forward the full brand as maybe you all would like. Just, again, options. We did show on the lower third from the left, we did show just as an option that the Danville logo is at the bottom. And again, this is kind of like playing checkers or building a puzzle and taking all the puzzle pieces and building them differently. So there's a lot of different kind of options here that you might be able to choose from.
John,
Sorry.
The second one on the top, what's the sign on the painting?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Good catch. That would maybe, and this is maybe a way of cheating a little bit with this federal standard, where we might be able, if you're at a specific location where this sign is, you might be able to cheat a little bit and say that you're at, I'm just trying to think of an example, maybe the cemetery. Maybe there's maybe there's this main wayfinding sign, and you know, we had 3 really important things on further into town or something, and I forget the name of the street the cemetery's on off of Lexington Avenue. Thank you. I should know that. But maybe we're cheating a little bit by hanging that. Just thanks for catching that. Some other options, again, different kinds of posts, some fairly intricate posts with flutes, and you've probably seen the style, hanging the sign off of the side, mounting it right on the post, you know, some just very simple posts, you know, you're just square or round. And again, there's a lot of options, and we're going to give you all the opportunity to vote again here in a few minutes. And then here's our kind of preliminary family of signs that we've come up with, and I think it's important that you see the scale of these, and we've drawn the people in there just to give you an idea what the scale might be. So most of these signs, and we have are up higher where you can get kind of this peripheral view, and as you're either walking down the sidewalk or driving down the road, so that you can see it's up higher so that you can see it. You don't have to be right on top of it to see it. You've got this peripheral view. You can see it from a distance. And that in itself is one reason why the federal standard is for three lines per sign, because the letters are larger and you can see them from a further distance. I recently, and I shared these with Ron and Earl last week, recently visited a community where they had 5 or 6 lines on each sign, about the same size of sign, but with 6 lines on these, the letters get smaller, and you really do have to be just about on top to be able to read that destination. So in many ways, you'd like to be able to have more destinations, but there's a reason why that, you know, it has to do with the letter size. So any questions about what I've just gone through? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just asking about color and contrast. Is that representative? In other words, I can't see there's not enough contrast.
Right.
If you're driving past it, you know, to catch your attention. So is that your concept of color, or it's just a?
Well, a couple things. As part of the branding study, they.
It doesn't matter about the branding. You know what I'm saying? I understand the branding study, but if you can't read the sign, the branding doesn't.
Yeah, and I think, well, let me mention a couple things. The branding study did have a kind of palette of colors, and we've tried to kind of stay with, and there was a bunch of colors, so we've tried to make those choices, and they're not all represented here. The scale of what you're looking at here is probably not legible, even if you're right on top of it, to be able to read the letters. And it just has to do with the scale. But and that you make an excellent point. Maybe we could actually at some point bring in a full-size mock-up. It may not be the real sign, but we could do a full-size plotted out, you know, at full size. So that's a really good observation.
And you know, certain colors disappear.
That's right.
Gray, blue, brown, and green.
Yeah.
And in other words, that disappears.
Right.
That will disappear into the landscape. I'm just giving you a thought about that.
I appreciate that. No, I think it's a really good observation, particularly as you all are reviewing these, being able to get a real. I mean, this kind of gives you a sense of scale. You know, if that's a 6-foot-tall guy, you know that, you know, the top of that sign, but it is maybe not a really great representation of being able to see it, but yeah. Oranges and your brighter color, reds, blues tend to start, like great observation, blues tend to disappear up in the sky. But yeah. Yes, ma'am.
This kind of goes along with what you're saying, and also what you were saying, which is visibility and readability are really critical, since that's what they're for, and that's their whole purpose. And I wonder what you think about, you know, you talked about that really only 3 destinations or whatever can have, you know, good, readable, whatever. And I wonder about having, you know, the words Danville, something else in there, I can't see what it is, historically bold, on the top of three things that are the more needed to be read things.
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't have that with the D logo one on the left. But is that an issue for people who are maybe unfamiliar with the town, and so therefore they actually are trying to read historically? You know, we all know, like, oh yeah, it says historically bold. We know this.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But the people who are visitors and who are going, Danville, whatever that says historically bold, and you know, then by the time they get down to the first line, they're
Yeah.
gone, you know, because they're past it.
Yeah, that's actually another really good observation that we probably need to be mindful of, whether it's just the D or if it's the Danville historically bold, is, you know, making sure that it doesn't draw more attention than the actual destination. But I think that's a really good observation, and I don't think this slide is doing justice to some of the lettering we have, but you can tell we have some different colors of letters on this, and if you were looking at this on his laptop where it was nice and it would read better, but I think your observations are good. Yes, sir.
None of these that we're looking at are tier 1 signs. Is that true? These are tier 2 signs?
No, these are all these would be a combination.
I see.
So
tier 1?
well, whatever style that we choose, it'll be uniform, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2. So we're right now. I mentioned the tier 1 and tier 2, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we're not segregating the design between tier 1 and 2.
Even though, for instance, on a bypass, you might be going at 50 miles an hour, versus in downtown, you're not going.
No, well, and I was just going to say, now we may choose to alter the size based on that speed, but for the most part, at major intersections, there's going to be some, for instance, out on the bypass or coming in from Lexington Road, you may be if that light's green, you may continue going 50 or 60 miles an hour. And again, the size of the letters are meant, that size you'll be able to see it even at 50 miles an hour. Obviously, you're going to see it quicker and it's not going to leave a lasting of an impression, but we're talking, just seconds. Yes, sir.
When you say a family of signs, does that mean that there will be 4 different, up there right now, there are 4 different types of signs? That's a family, right?
Well, no, and that's a good question that I probably didn't clarify. A family of signs will be a set of signs in different applications, and so the design would all be the same. We put it up here as just our beginning of the family, just to illustrate how we would be communicating that to you. But
So we're looking at 4 families.
well, you're exactly right, actually.
Okay.
Yeah,
Those are just representative ideas of what the family could look like.
that's right. So the next step is here tonight is I would like to get your all's input of what you all like. And I'm going to actually turn this board around, and you're all going to come up and do another real quick voting exercise. This board is and actually, as you look at this, you'll be able to read the lettering a little bit better, just even looking at it on this. Are there any other just kind of general questions? Yes, sir.
It's too early to ask what the relative cost of the different families is?
It's a bit early. I think, for the most part, I think the cost of this sign, mounting it on brackets off the side probably is, it's maybe $26 more or less than if you mount it on the post like this. I mean, I think in the overall big picture, I would say cost should not be the driver on selecting what's desired. I think the differences would be, fairly minimal.
Can I ask just one question? Following up on the points of legibility on signs, has it been your experience in other communities that the real key decision point on sign design is legibility? And I'm going to the different colors versus maybe a white letter that may be more legible,
Yeah.
with a smaller color coding.
Right.
I mean, do people tend to in other communities gravitate?
Yeah, yes. I have my preferences. I don't want to try and bias anybody, but oftentimes, and we've begun to illustrate this here, is that the entire panel is not colored, but you made the arrow, as I'm showing here, may represent that color of recreational or healthcare or cultural or whatever it might be. You've kind of broken my code here and figured it out, but I mean, and we like giving people design options. Once we hear and see what you all said, then we'll express an opinion about your all's decisions. But we like to be open and transparent and give you all opportunities. You may not like any of these. I don't know. Maybe you have some other ideas, but I think it's a great start. Yes, ma'am.
Not to beat a dead horse, but I just want to clarify, because Ron was kind of clear that he'd like for this to go for an hour and a half, and so I'm thinking, so up to an hour and a half, so up to 8 o'clock. And you have an exercise for us that talks about design choices and what we think about the legibility and, these different things, which seems like a good idea. But I know that last time when we were here, and again, I brought it up this time, I know I brought it up at the commission meeting, most of the people that I think are here are very interested in things like what's going to be signed on the bypass. That was the big theme that was come to. And I want to make sure that that's not being
It's
put
not-
into the last 10 minutes.
Well, if you all take 5 or 10 minutes to go through this voting exercise, or maybe you don't want to do it, and I don't think you want Ron and Earl and myself to make these decisions, I would really like to take 5 or 10 minutes and get your input. Gives us a chance to stretch, and then that gives us 45 minutes to talk about the rest. If you're,
Great. I just wanted to make sure before it was too late. I'm interested in this too, so.
Great.
go for it.
Any other questions, or are you ready to?
I think that as all of us here have a stake in this on the bypass and what the signage is. And I mean, all of the design, it's great and we want a beautifully designed thing, but I think all of us are, our big thing is what's going to be on the bypass. And one of my questions, actually, if that sign could be bigger, why is it just 3 things? I mean, if it's bigger than this, can't it be,
Can't fight City Hall, so to speak. It's a federal standard. Like I said, if we get, and we're not making decisions tonight, we're not going to get into, we're going to talk about where we think the critical sign locations will be, but we're not going to, the next meeting will be what's going to be on that sign, and we'll talk about, because then we would be here until 10 o'clock tonight. I mean, we get into some really get into the weeds when we start making choices of what's on signs. Yes, sir.
Now, you had said at one point, if I remember, that you're not peppering the bypass with signs.
No.
In terms of the limit of 3 per sign, could you pepper the bypass with signs?
Well, we could if it would be allowed, but I'm not inclined to do that,
No, I understand.
because then you begin to lose the effectiveness of what you, I mean, once people enter the Tier 1 so to speak, and for the most part, it is the bypass. And they start coming into town. I mean, that's really all the way around town almost. And, they're beginning to drive slower, or we hope they will. And in some ways, you can say signs may help to make them drive slower. So, I don't want to clutter up the bypass. And you'll see in a few minutes, we've made some decisions. Wrong word. We've made some recommendations of where the critical signs should be.
But not what will be on them, is that what you just said?
That's right.
So in other words, you're not bringing, to this meeting, you're not bringing more of an opinion about what will be signed on the bypass than last time?
No.
Okay, that's something we keep asking for, so.
Well,
it seems to be the
it's a process, and
Yeah.
we are. Yeah. Robbie.
Now, like when you stand on the corner of Houstonville Road and the bypass, there are just
I know.
dozens and dozens of different kinds of signs, and it's not just these cultural aspects.
No,
that it's not
absolutely.
We have an interest in reducing.
Yeah.
There's signs for William Whitley House. There's a sign for Parable Battlefield.
Yeah.
Now, are you also trying to condense Parable Battlefield and William Whitley into things like this too, or or are you only trying to restrict Danville's assets?
Well, and that was one of our rules. We're kind of more internally focused, although.
So you would keep a big sign for William Whitley, but reduce.
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. Yeah, so I was going to mention this when we get to the some of the sign locations. Tonight, we're also not recommending which signs would be removed. And you'll remember our last meeting, we talked about removing some clutter. And your example of Fourth and the bypass are, it's a great example. There's a lot of clutter there. We may be removing some brown signs. That's one of the next steps. It's probably 2 steps away, because we're going to be coming back real quickly to talk about what's on each sign. But we will be meeting with the highway department and talk about redundancy. Maybe some of the brown signs are removed, some of the clutter, but it's all part of the process. And you may tell me that you want Pioneer Playhouse on these signs and you want the brown signs. Probably would tell me that. But again, we're trying to take this systematic approach and accomplish our goals. Yes, ma'am.
You just proposed a whole other question in my mind. There are a
Oh.
lot of brown signs out there that people have paid for. So part of this process may be removing some of those?
It could be, unless there's objections.
So Wilderness Trails Distillery, which has a sign,
Uh-huh.
may or may not stay.
I'm not suggesting that it's going, but I'm not suggesting that it would stay.
That's like way far ahead in the process. What we're trying to do is allow him to manage the process of selecting the style sign. I think the last meeting, we gave him a list of those destinations where this is more of a steering committee approach, right, which is unique, so everybody has a chance to speak. And what he's trying to do, what a slide or two before that, I think listed the destinations that this group had influence on, where this group suggested those things. So I think what we're trying to do is go from, okay, nothing, which is really what you should start with, not sign clutter, but let's start with nothing, and let's develop from that a signage strategy, which includes the type of signs that we pick, and all of those elements. And so it's really a process, and when we hear that dialogue, we're jumping all the way to the conclusion. I understand the interest. The interest is real.
Well, when you say start with nothing, it automatically we think that things are coming down.
Yeah.
Because when there's nothing, things are not.
Well, when you start with a wayfinding plan, I think that's the correct approach. Mentally, that's how it's not, you're starting, if you do anything else, you're not doing a plan. What you're doing is trying to reinforce what your preconceived notion is.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing, what he's doing is trying to develop a master plan with the critical things that's been identified, right? And so you really don't know let's just allow it to go through the process, let's not jump into, let's not be so narrow focused that we're jumping to the end of the conversation
But Earl,
before we
the
even have
reason
any
you're
of this.
getting responses about the jumping to the head is because both tonight and last meeting, a couple months ago, the consultant did in fact give examples and in that way jump ahead.
Because
to what
we
would
asked
be on-
for it.
To what would be on the bypass.
Right,
Well,
absolutely.
last time it was talked about that it might be the library, Constitution Square, and Center College that were signed in the big tier 1 sign. Today, when someone asked, he said, maybe Center College and I don't remember the other example. So
Don't take that, those were,
Well, the problem is here, let me say this real quick. The point is that we're asking that question before he starts his presentation.
yeah.
The fact that we're asking the question before so when you're asking him to give you examples, he's going to give you examples of the first three.
And don't take what I said as,
Or final design examples.
and don't take what I said as
are you
being,
saying that the things, for example, in the highly chosen category, that you are not, or both of you are not suggesting there be a policy that those are not signed in the tier 1?
No.
No,
He
no,
pointed out
no.
the screen and showed you what the highest
this has nothing to do with tiers.
were at the last meeting.
But you're not saying that in your minds you have ruled out that those could be on the bypass in tier 1?
I've not ruled that out. This list has nothing to do with tiers. I'm just simply telling you what you told me last week. I'm trying to be, let you all see outcomes of your own outcomes. And please don't take me, the previous comments when I gave some examples of turning to KSD or going to center or whatever, that was just an example. Don't take that literal where I use 3rd and Lexington as, please. I mean, we're going to get to those kind of decisions. Also, I'm ready. I'm trying to. Okay. Yeah. Oh, give me the. Let's give 3 each of the blues. Okay. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. In the back.
My name is Tom Hensley, and I live at 2061 U.S. Highway 127 North. What a horrible address.
You do it well.
Mr. Scott, you're my neighbor. Horrible address. I wish I were the Harry Ford Road. Mr. Coffey told me that your name is Carmen and you have Danville connections.
I do.
Your father was from.
My father was Brody Carmen.
I knew it. I thought I did. Here's my question. Do you have any influence whatsoever over state signage that's already on the list?
Depends on
I
what.
said influence.
We will have a voice. The state actually has been advocating that the city go through this process. So I think we will definitely have a voice and we'll have their ear.
Well, let
The-
me give you an example. The new connector road, 2168, is about 400 yards from my driveway. And 400 yards on the other side of my driveway, there are 22 signs.
I don't doubt it.
Some are doubles,
Yeah.
some are singles. There are at least 56 signs in that 800 yards. I have to find a place in my driveway
Yeah.
to look north to get out on the highway safely.
Well,
So my point is, the man asked about clutter. It is a complete
Yeah.
move on. And you could take 2/3 of them away and you get the same information. They're duplicate. You drive it every day.
Yep.
It's crazy.
I
thought when they built the connector, that maybe they'd take care of some of that. And they moved a couple around and added some more.
Yeah.
Route signage or, like, is this route signage,
Oh, yes, it's 127 business, it's
Yeah.
127
Let-
bypass, it's,
let me try and give you a simple.
and really, drive
Let me try.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, let me try and give you a simple answer to that, or two answers. Number one, a lot of those are based on federal standards, but I think that what you raise an excellent point. If you've got some sight distance issues, that is what will grab their attention.
Now, y'all taking a photograph out at Maple Avenue or Old Harrisburg Road. You got photographs of that area?
We do. I don't have them with me. No, I'm.
Go to the stoplight, look back, go the other way, look back, you got the sign.
I understand and I appreciate what you're saying.
And I know the reason I posed the question is, do you have any influence over those signs? And
We may have some.
But if you work,
We may have some. I mean, and I mentioned before, we're going to, that'll be part of our step. And Earl will tell you this, and Ron will tell you, the state wanted us to go through this process, and it's a process that we're trying to go through.
and that's one little intersection. It is nothing
Oh, I know.
like Houstonville Road.
Oh,
but it's
I know.
almost as cluttered. Yes.
About a number of years ago, right up from Hardy Leo, right where the 2168 changed that right in front of that beautiful historic area of Rose Lawn or whatever that farm is there. They put up a sign, a buckle seatbelt sign, one of the biggest signs in one of those pristine areas that you can find. But we need buckle seat signs, sure, but I don't know that we need it right there.
Yeah. I mean, and we're going to be looking at some of those, and we'll
I
be.
just ask that you keep that in mind.
It's on the radar screen.
Keep it in mind, and if you can be of help,
I-
I'm not opposed
I hear you.
to nice signage to send you downtown Danville,
Yeah.
but I don't need any more.
I hear you. Okay, one last question, because we are going to get down to our just 10 or 15 minutes to the last segment. Yes, sir.
Well, I apologize.
No.
Is that obvious to everyone else, but one way to interpret my vote, if I'm gonna make it, is that I pick one of those groups of signs. But to me, there's another way of voting that says, you read across the top, do you want to have it say Danville historically bold, or do you just wanna have D? Another way to go horizontally is, do you want the color to be the whole panel, or do you want the color to be in a little circle? And so it seems to me that there are picks within.
That's right. So you've got 3 dots. So you get to put dots on 3 different. I mean, you might put all 3 on this one, if you're really so. Or you may have ideas. So that's why we're not giving just one. So and if we had the time, I would have this sheet or this board, one for everybody, and let you vote. That way you're not getting influenced by whoever's sitting next to you and standing in front. So
So it's where on the sign you put the dot that votes? In other words, if you put it at the bottom versus at the top?
I think let's maybe not get too. Let's look at the sign as a whole, and I mean, if you really like that sign and you don't like the others, put all 3 dots, down here or up here or something.
But if you like that style of sign, but you prefer not to have it say, like.
Yeah, maybe you just want the D up here or
then
something.
you just have to choose that
Yeah,
one and figure it
this is a fairly unscientific way. It's a way to get up and stretch your legs and take. I'm going to say 5 minutes now. Maybe we'll stretch it to 7,
Let me
but
just say that,
okay.
you're saying that, we're trying to decide on the design tonight, but we're all having trouble actually seeing it, which
Well, when you
is
get-
the main purpose. I
well-
mean, so we're one saying that the brown, we're not sure.
Well, come up here and look at them, and maybe it will be
I know,
better.
but, for
This is not for foot
choosing.
traffic, these signs. They can be, but they're not.
Yeah, I know, but it's hard for us, if you're having us choose a design tonight, I mean, and we can't really even.
Design elements, I mean, you're really looking for design elements. So
Shape,
you
okay, color.
keep that in mind.
We're looking.
Like I said, it's unscientific. It's a way of getting. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Hi. I'm sorry.
You drive down
three things that we have on the sign. You can't see any more than that. That's the reason.
And that's part of this.
I do interior design. All I do is deal with color and contrast. If there's not enough contrast, you can't see.
I agree.
So black on white, black on dark, white on dark
Yeah.
green. It has to be dark and light.
And we've seen them in all different, and I agree. And you will see when you step up here that the legibility is much better just looking at them on this than looking at on this.
What's really important is when you put it up out there on the street, and I come driving down the street.
Oh, I agree,
and I see
yeah.
it there. That's what's important.
And I think
I mean, they've.
and I think
Yeah, it's a.
But now the pool is going downtown.
Yeah.
I understand. Well, I understand what you're saying and appreciate the comments. Let's go on and keep moving. We've got, we had hoped to have more time, but let's go on and jump into the next sequence. And I appreciate you all taking the time. Great questions. I've heard some side comments that aren't necessarily reflected by the dots, but and again, this was just a non-scientific, casual kind of, but I think maybe there's some revelations here, perhaps, but we're taking note of the other comments about colors or logos and so forth. So let's move on, because apparently there's some of you at least that are really wanting to talk about locations. This begins to talk about our tiers. You can see the square in the middle. That's we're calling that the Tier 2 or downtown destination. So our focus will be different kind of as we move in towards town versus kind of the outlying area, which is mostly, for the most part, defined by the bypass. Okay. This begins to talk about some destinations that you all voted on, and these are just the Tier 1 destinations. This doesn't reflect the other, okay? And these are the higher votes, okay? We've added a few that perhaps could be considered, and we're not necessarily saying, and perhaps these aren't, the clarity of this projector maybe isn't as good as I'd like, but we've added a few. We'll get to, at the next step, we'll get to say, if you like them, we're going to give you choices. You know, we may, at some intersection, we may say, here's 5 different choices, but, you know, we've really got to narrow it down to 3. And it does appear that some of you are having a hard time reading this, but if you have any questions, I'll try and read these off to you. So categories. We talked about categories, and let me just read these off. And these are different colors. We have recreational, historic, education, and let me just give an example. Recreational, in other words, like Millennium Park. Historic, Perryville Battlefield. Again, this is Tier 1. Cultural, the Distillery, Pioneer Playhouse. Industrial, the Industrial Park. Okay?
These are just examples, potential.
Right.
Why these? I mean, I don't understand.
What?
Why are these as the examples given?
Because this is what was voted upon, for one. Well, no, I'm just telling you what you.
Put them up earlier. You put high choice.
These are examples, okay? These are not decisions.
Wait, but you just said it was what was voted on, but.
These are examples.
Hang on, I'm speaking. Henry Jackson
Excuse
Park
me.
was one of the least voted upon, whereas Dollhouse Museum was in the first list and doesn't.
Tier 1. Tier 1.
I know.
We're going to get to the Dollhouse Museum.
Okay, but I am talking about Tier 1.
Okay.
Tier 1 is what everybody who came here last time, and what almost everybody who came here this time is especially interested in.
Point taken. I understand your concern. That's why we're showing these.
Well, so the point is that like Jackson Park was one of the ones that received maybe like 1 vote, whereas Dollhouse Museum was in the first list.
Again, this is an example of categories. Whether it's industrial or cultural or whatever. Okay? Of locations. We're not saying that. We're not saying that these are. We're not saying that some Tier 2s would not be located in Tier 1. We're giving an example. This is geographic discussion of where places are located and what they are. We're going to show the Dollhouse Museum in Tier 2. That doesn't mean that that is exclusively going to be located in just Tier 2. okay? And apparently I'm doing a poor job of communicating this, but I apologize.
Understand, yeah, I think that.
This is geographic only. This has nothing to do with what's going to be on a sign and where. This is a...
You're saying this is just to get used to the color codes, perhaps?
Yes. That's why we have the different codes.
So those dots are not signs?
Those
or
dots are,
those things are-
those dots are the locations of the industrial park or,
Things that were identified in that list.
right.
So why does it say tier 1 categories then?
Because a category is, we could have said like a land use. A category is recreational or industrial or cultural or whatever the 8 examples are that we gave.
And cultural, is that brown? Or is that cultural, is it brown?
It's a brownish color, yes. Is it? Okay. And I, yeah. And the clarity of this is I apologize, is not good. But so important to us also was looking at the volume of traffic. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is an illustration of actual traffic counts along the various different corridors. And then the decision points, and we talked about this some at our last meeting. Now, this begins to translate into primary locations for signage. This doesn't translate at all on what's on a sign. There may be a sign at all 4 points in the intersection in both directions. These are just the primary points, what we call decision points, or where signs could be located. And not to anybody's surprise, and in Tier 1, they're at basically all the primary intersections along the bypass and as you begin to enter into town. I will tell you that, and this was not left off, in our mind, it was left off, that we are strongly considering a decision point at Ghost Pike off of the bypass. And I just noticed that was not put back on there. Yes, there is a traffic light there, right. Right. I'm talking about at the bypass, yes ma'am. Right. Okay. I apologize, I just noticed that. So this begins to get down in the weeds even more. And I really do apologize the clarity of this, but this begins to talk, this brings forward the decision points, which is before we had a circle, now we have a square, and you'll see within that square there are dots. Those dots are getting down in the weeds even further, showing specific locations which have to do with the direction of traffic, which also, and these are informed by the traffic volume and primary routes. So,
Real quick, let me interrupt you. I do think you need to consider Ghost Pike.
that was left out, and I just noticed that when on the previous slide. So that would have, I don't have a laser, so let me get up here and point to try and help interpret this. For instance, this dot right here, you'll see the letter B below it. That B would mean that that's the view that you're looking at. For instance, that location would be as you're driving north, so you'd be looking at a sign going into town. Likewise, this letter A is on this side of the dot, so that would be as you're driving east going out of town along the bypass. And I'm not saying what's going to be signed there, but those are just examples. And the legend on the right, which is unfortunately not as legible as I would like, describes the location associated with the numbers and the letters. So now we're getting into the Tier 2 locations of the physical entity itself, not sign locations. Okay? And then we go through, these are the ones that were most voted. And then we, based on observations or our thoughts, we added several. Okay? Same exercise as Tier 1. These are locations of the destination, whether it's the dollhouse or Ephraim McDowell or whatever, and we're putting them into what we think is the appropriate category associated with a color. That's all this is. This has nothing to do with sign locations. Likewise, in Tier 2, traffic volumes. Okay? So the yellow, which really jumps out, is kind of moderately traveled. But it's in the downtown area, it is maybe moderately, and these are the same traffic counts as that on Tier 1, but Main Street is probably the most traveled in this particular tier. And then likewise we get into some decision points. The primary decision points in this downtown area. And there may, and I see that maybe we left out a circle that would be a decision point at 4th and Main, but you can see that we have some, I think we left that out, we have some locations. Again, the dashed circle are decision points, the solid dots are locations, not sign locations. But all of these begin to inform us about locations in the downtown area, okay? Not what's on the sign, but the location, the primary locations of the signs relative to the decision point exhibit that we showed before. Same as Tier 1. So we've got a combination, and this is the same as the other slide of Tier 1. On this slide, or this exhibit, we have a combination of physical locations of a destination, whether it be KSD or the courthouse or City Hall. We have decision points, and then the smaller dots would be the actual sign location. Okay? So that is where we are at this point, soon to have, and we're ready probably within the next 10 days to 2 weeks to come back to talk about, okay, at the corner of 3rd and Lexington or 4th and Lexington, we maybe will give you 5 or 6 options of what's going to be on that sign as you travel towards Maple Avenue. That's can be a very difficult discussion. There's going to be disagreement. You'll probably disagree with my thoughts, but I want to hear your all's thoughts first. I have my own opinions, but we felt that, and as you can see, we've already taken an hour and 10 or 15 minutes. The next step is probably another hour and a half to 2 hour discussion in itself. But we felt that it's better to ease into this, whether you agree with me or you like what I've said or you understand, maybe understanding is maybe the bigger issue. I think that it's better to take this sequentially. I'm hearing everything you've said. I can assure you of this, and a lot of the comments I'm sure will be carried forward and might be more appropriate at the next discussion or in 2 discussions from now. But this project's not going to be implemented. We're not going to seal this up until we have gone through all of this. Some of these discussions, and it's fine, I'm good with it, are maybe not as applicable tonight as they may be at the next meeting. But I'm trying to drive this train as we feel like the process demands. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I know it's a process and I know it's gonna take time. The implementation is multi-year.
Yeah.
Because it's money driven. But I had you a couple questions. I think a lot of us like both those family signs, but maybe a combination. So will you be at some point in the future taking some of that and redesigning?
We will.
What we had talked about with a possible combination?
Absolutely. So the next meeting will be driven primarily with these discussions where we under each one of these lines over here on the right, we'll have another 6 lines or whatever of what might be on that sign. That's going to be a pretty lengthy discussion, but I think it's healthy to continue revisiting this based on what we're hearing from you tonight. And we've heard a lot of what everybody has said about whether it should be a D or the full logo, which maybe is not necessarily reflected on these dots. Again, this is very unscientific. Obviously, nobody liked this. So, I mean, that in itself tells you something. Yeah, right.
My comment would be that I went ahead and I did put a blue dot and I voted. But I voted for one of these types of signs, but I really feel that these types of signs do work best downtown. When you identified some buildings that were kind of historic to Danville, they were all kind of downtown. They weren't on the bypass.
That's true.
On Houstonville Road. I almost would say, in my opinion, I would vote for a plan, or I would appreciate a plan that looks at this downtown. But I don't have a problem with the state brown signs. I think
Okay.
you can see them when you're going by 60 miles an hour.
Well, whether you the design or you like the color, they're very iconic. Whether you're in Danville, Kentucky, or Paris, France,
But of course, you're coming up with a plan that integrates both Tier 1 and Tier 2. I just wanted to
Yeah.
have said that I'm for this downtown, but not on the bypass. I want more visibility.
Okay.
On the bypass.
Okay.
I agree with
I'm gonna disagree a little bit, because if we want a family of signs, and we want people on the bypass to start to visually think about what they're gonna look at downtown, I think it would be nice to have some similarities, I guess, because it's out there
Yeah.
55 to 60 miles an hour, we want them to read them. But if you're gonna do a family of signs, they see it out there, and then they start looking for the same thing downtown.
But there are so many signs out there, including the William Whitley and the Heritage,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Fort
That
Heritage.
could be years down the road, decluttering.
Let,
We
let,
have plenty of money, yeah.
let me back up to a comment, and we're actually now we're not doing too bad on time. Let me back up to a comment, and we talked a little bit about it at the first meeting, and I'm going to say that a lot of those brown signs were put up as much as 10 or 12 years ago. I'm not sure,
Brown
but
is more recent. It used to be green, and it's kind of been changed to brown.
but the locations. Don't forget that wayfinding, because of technology, wayfinding has completely changed. And I'm just going to use an example, and you'll make. Is it really important to have a sign that is taking you to Crab Orchard, the William Whitley House? Are people really? Is that a useful sign? And that's the point I'm trying to make. So, 10 years ago, that maybe wasn't on people's minds. So, and I'm just using that as an example.
So many of these signs are about a traveler. You did use the word traveler. That means not live in the community. If they are traveling, they're not Googling William Whitley House, and when they see that sign, they may Google it after they see it because it prompts that synapse in their head.
Under that scenario, I would agree with you, but I'm disagreeing with you more tonight than I would have 5 years ago, because we're all so technology driven, and I think we need to be, I try and be mindful of that. But and I use William Whitley House sign in Danville, and you may say, oh yeah, we don't care about that, but you may disagree if there's and I don't know if there is, maybe there's a Pioneer Playhouse sign in Crab Orchard.
Well, see, that's the thing.
I understand that, I get it.
They're taking William Whitley down, because then why shouldn't they take down every Boyle County sign, and stand for it?
I know, there's balancing acts, and I hear you, but I'm using an example of some of the decisions that we need to go through. Yes, ma'am.
Well, and going with what Robbie is saying, one of the issues with doing things by category is that, I mean, you have to be careful, and as you said, it's a balancing act, but there's a really important marketing component to what goes into Tier 1, and people who are traveling may need to find certain things, and so it's good to have signs for them. But usually you don't have a traveler going around bypass going, oh, George, get off, they've got a high school here, right? It's like, come into this town, let's not eat at McDonald's after all. Whereas when they see Pioneer Playhouse or the Dollhouse Museum, obviously, but
We're going to
then
be,
people may Google that.
Yeah.
So the categories you have to sort of look at them when you're looking at Tier
Yeah.
1 in terms of the
What-
old drawing people off the bypass problem.
yeah, let's not put too much emphasis on the categories. The category colors, wherever they may end up, are meant to be more subtle than pop out as being a green or a yellow or a blue. It's just kind of a subtle reference or inference that it's kind of like the brown sign. That's not so subtle anymore, but everybody knows what a brown sign is. Or so, to a certain extent, we're creating this kind of internal brand for Danville associated with colors. But it's really far more subtle than, say, the brown signs are intended to be.
And I would disagree slightly with it's a digital age and everyone is doing GPS, because we anecdotally, every day at Pioneer Playhouse, have people calling us who are still older and not using GPS and saying,
Yeah.
wow, I found your sign, I found this
Okay.
because I saw a sign.
Okay.
And they're not, I mean, they're older, they're in their
Yeah,
art departments, they're.
That's a good point. I don't disagree with that.
See, our audience is, older.
That's actually a good point. And as a planner, those are important things. We often say we try and be multi-generational, but those generations begin to leapfrog, and it's as difficult sometimes to accommodate the generation, say, of our parents as it is accommodating, I don't know what the next generation is called, X's,
So our generation that comes to my class is
more, I would agree.
they're not using
Yeah.
GPS.
That's across the community, actually.
Yeah.
I've asked Norton Center, I've asked Georgia, myself, who are, and senior citizens are a very big part of that.
Yeah.
These are often the primary part, but so, yeah.
And Patrick had a point, if they're a traveler like in an RV who travels a lot, they're used to seeing brown signs, or
Yeah.
the green sign and the brown sign. And if there's some new kind of sign, it might throw them for a loop, because they're not.
I don't know that I completely agree that, okay, I mean, I don't think our final recommendations they're certainly not intended to throw people for loops, but I think it's valid to consider these in addition to the brown signs. And I think that this conversation or this particular topic will evolve greatly when we meet with the highway department. And
Well, and one of the questions to do with that is, I know you were talking about that these signs are, $26 difference between this one and this one, but the difference between the signs, kind of like what the Wilderness Trail has, a series of 4
Yeah.
signs, the difference between the expense of that and the expense of this must be astronomical.
well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And don't take my $26 literal, please.
I'm just saying, if we can't afford it, we'd like to have the other. I mean,
That's a good point.
concerned here, so they might be a way to bridge the gap between,
So we can put more things or
Well,
other
I don't
things
know.
or
Well-
signs in between those big things.
Well, I think Matt's suggesting that that's one application for brown signs. I don't know that we're suggesting that there may be more brown signs. And again, whether you agree it or not, take one of my original assumptions. If you're on the path and you're moving towards a destination, we don't think that it's necessarily good to continue repeating that.
Just to comment on the digital age, I think signage is even more important. Somebody's using a GPS, they're heading somewhere, and they don't even know there's other things, right? They're not using
Yeah.
maps, they're not using signs, they haven't researched anything.
That's a good point.
So a sign that points out the dollhouse because they're
Yeah, and that's why we have asked for this community input so that we would know what those other things are. I'm not attempting to say that signs are not needed just because we all have smartphones. I'm by no means, but I think it certainly influences our mindset today versus 15 years ago.
Yeah, I'm just saying this is important.
Yeah, and unfortunately, in 15 years looking ahead, the people visiting the Pioneer Playhouse probably have transitioned to smartphones, and then the generation X to the power 2, no telling what they have. Well, I mean, there's obviously discussions like that going on. I mean, we may all be in 15 years, we may all be driving without steering wheels and accelerators and have the virtual reality mask on, and signs may not even. I'm just making a radical statement. It's tough to sit behind the crystal ball sometimes, particularly with the Googles and the Amazons and whoever else is, and Tesla, and Tesla probably is more important than Amazon relative to signage. And these are not unusual discussions, and they're difficult discussions. They're hard discussions, and we're used to it. We sometimes I don't explain myself. I usually get to the point. Maybe it takes longer than I need to or want to, but we are deliberately taking this slow so that we can hear your voice, and so that we are not designing in a vacuum. And now, am I going to, or will we respond to every single comment? I hope we do in some way or another, but there'll still be hard discussions. I can assure you of that at the next meeting. I guarantee it.
Is there any way we can get more than a week's notice this time on the meeting? A lot of people kind of plan ahead and
Yeah.
keep getting 1 week's notice.
Okay. I'll work with Earl and Ron and Erica, and I'm not even sure, how are you getting notified? Is it the newspaper or?
Somebody who's in this room actually called me up.
Oh, okay.
Said,
Okay.
or emailed me, so that's how I got
Okay.
notice.
Point taken. We'll try and improve that.
I heard from someone else, so yeah.
Okay.
Unless you have a smartphone, you can't find it.
Yeah.
But John, the next meeting, we should be able to schedule second or third week of October and reach that
I think so, yeah.
conclusion pretty
Yeah.
quickly so we can post it more in advance, right?
I'm ready to schedule that between you and Earl and Erica, who's kind of the keeper of the. I'm ready to sit down and schedule that, and we'll look at, as Ron said, we're moving out maybe the second week of October.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, we can schedule.
Well, that gives us a milestone where we have to make that decision. Well, we're 4 minutes early. My gosh, what are we going to talk about now? Dinner that you didn't have because you came to this meeting, or I appreciate the yes.
Let me say thank you for coming. I know this is a really difficult project, and hopefully we can just all get together and for the better of the community. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you all. I mean, this is, as they say, this is what I get paid to do. So, great. Thank you.